This is Sports for Real with Coach Hall. And if you're like me, you're excited about today because today we're going to find out who the first two teams are to make it to the Final Four. Been a great tournament so far, lots of upsets. And we had all four number one seeds make it to the Sweet 16, but only two of them are going to the Elite Eight. In the last couple of days, we lost the number one seed each day. On Thursday night, in thrilling fashion, Alabama knocked off top seed North Carolina. And last night, in kind of a uh, disappointing fashion, we lost number one seed Houston. Um, I don't like to see teams battle it out, but I like to see teams at full strength. And when Houston lost their leader, that kind of tightened things up. And I think with the leader, it was no doubt that Houston would have got by Duke last night. But that's the travails that you face when you have to play one and done. Whatever happens to you, that's what happens. It's not like the NBA where you can lose three games and still win the championship. And I think one and done is just like life is the way it should be. But this is a little different program that I'm starting out with today. If you look behind me here, I have images of two different bridge collapses. We know about the Baltimore bridge that happened a couple of days ago. Well, so far I've heard that six people died or six cars went into the water. A couple of people were saved. Um, until they actually pull the cars up, you're never going to know how many people were actually lost in that one. But the other side over here is the bridge collapse that took place in St. Petersburg back in 1980. That one's more, not that Baltimore situation is not tragic, but this takes me all the way back to the beginning of when the fog started to lift around me and I realized what was going on in the world. 1980, May May 9th, I believe it was the day that this bridge was hit by a ship in a storm. The storm blew it off path and it hit the bridge, causing 1,200-foot section to collapse. And with that, you had a Greyhound bus, several cars that went down, and overall, like 35 people died. And you see that car teeter on the edge. He hadn't slammed on the brakes. He would have been another one. And sometimes it's just like basketball. When it's your time, it's your time. If it's not, hey, you survive in advance. And this guy here looks like a Granada there. I know because we had two of them as a kid. That looked like his, saved his life. Old Ford Granada. So I guess they were worth something after all. But I was 9 years old, and the fog around me started to lift on the world when I was about 8 years old. And this is one of the first, if not the first major event I ever seen that took place. I remember the news coverage. I remember them talking to the person that has the last person to get across the bridge that survived. Um, and this guy right here on the bridge here, they interviewed him, as I recall. Big story. Not like, they didn't have the news coverage that they have today with internet and all the different channels we have access to now. What we had then, CBS, ABC, and NBC, 2, 4, and 6. And if you're lucky, you can pick up something on Channel 13. A couple of years later, we got cable and we started getting Chicago news, and that really opened up the world. But again, I was watching the news that day because they were having um, Darrell Griffith on. If you know who Darrell Griffith is, they called him Dr. Duncanstein. Dr. Duncanstein led Louisville to the 1980 national championship. They knocked off UCLA, who had pulled off a couple of upsets themselves to get to the Final Four. If you recall, DePaul was the number one team in the country that year, and they ended up losing a 1 point game, and it started a series of events where they just couldn't get past a certain point. You will see that later with other teams, and I'm going to try to go through the years a little bit. But as UCLA got to the Final Four, they ended up going against a Big Ten team. Now, I don't know what the Big Ten team is, but what excited me about it, they had those little chyrons, and they had the train with the smoke coming out of it. And I don't know who that was. Purdue. Okay. They're talking about the Big Ten. Who was Purdue? I don't know anything about Purdue. Then they had another team from the Big Ten made the Final Four that year, Iowa. So you got Iowa, Purdue going up against Louisville and UCLA. Now, I don't remember who was actually played who, but I do know that Louisville beat UCLA in the championship game, and that's the first championship game I watched. Louisville knocked them off 59-54, and that game was in Indianapolis. So that was the beginning of me finding out what's going on in the sports world. I had heard about Magic and Bird. They actually played that epic Final Four the year before. DePaul actually got to the Final Four that year, but they lost to Larry Bird by a bucket. So they could have been in the championship in 79. But the Bird and Magic rivalry to me actually began in the NBA Finals. Well, in the NBA season. He talked about Bird and Magic, the two stars that was going to bring the NBA into the future. And they did that. And I don't know what's on my eye. And they actually did that. It bothered me. So Magic ended up winning the championship that year. Caldwell Jones of the 76ers had to face off against Magic, who lined up as center in that championship series. It was game six. And he outplayed Caldwell Jones, and the Lakers won the championship that year. And I didn't know it at the time, but in subsequent documentaries a couple of years ago, Magic, he did his whole life story. And in high school, he actually played all those different positions. So when Kareem got hurt and couldn't play in that finals game, Magic had the experience at center that he could step in and do a job. And at 6'9", he giving up a little size, but if you can get the rebound and get down the court, you're going to outrun Caldwell. And that's pretty much what he did. So there's the Bird Magic origin. You got the Final Four. This is going to be my 45th Final Four coming up next week. Oh, yeah, 45. It's going to be number 45. And after that 1980 matchup, I followed somewhat of 81. That's the year Indiana knocked off, I believe it was North Carolina to win the championship. 82, that's when Georgetown had North Carolina beat, and Freddie Brown threw that bad pass to James Worthy. And all he did was dribble out the clock. So you talk about heartbreak. That is the first real heartbreak I ever seen, where you got the team that can win it all, and then you start throwing the ball away like that. That really hurts. But in '83, North Carolina State, you've seen the documentary. They went on this magical run where they had to win every single game in the NCAA in the ACC tournament just to get to the NCAA tournament. Because back then, if you didn't win your conference tournament, there were very, very few spots. There were only 48 teams. You were guaranteed if you won your conference tournament, and which is the reason why they were so important back then. But right now, not so much. But not only did they win the conference tournament, every single thing that had to happen to them at the right moment, the right bounce, the right turnover, the missed shot, the non-calls, everything that went their way led to the final possession where they had to make a shot. He threw up one for the heavens, and just so happened Lorenzo Charles just have to be there to catch the ball and slam it home with virtually no time on the clock, beating Houston in heartbreaking fashion. I say heartbreaking fashion because for those 4 or 5 years stretch there, Houston is the team nobody wanted to play. They were athletic, jumping out the gym, all of that. I seen them one night. That's when we first got cable. I think it was like 1982. Ted Turner, he had his TBS channel, and he would show all the SEC games. So one of the first teams I like LSU because I like the way the letters sound, LSU, and that would be a common theme for me. But one night, they were playing in this Christmas tournament, I believe it was, and they played Houston. Houston played Kentucky. Houston beat the brakes off that team, and that's my introduction to Fox Lamb Jamma. And as you follow Houston, they will never get the break that they needed to get over the hump. But in '82, definitely in '83, they were the best teams. And every time something happened to them, much in the fashion that they lost last night to Duke, is the way that they lost to North Carolina and North Carolina State in those back-to-back years, which forbid us the rematch that would have taken place Sunday, had Houston been able to get by Duke, it would have been a rematch in the NCAA tournament between NC State and Houston. Now, I mentioned NC State not only because of the run they made in '83, but they're on the same kind of magical run that they had in '83. They had to win 5 games in the ACC tournament just to get to the tournament. And then when they got to the tournament, they had won 3 straight. They're playing the Elite Eight tomorrow, and they're going to play against their conference foe, Duke. Just like before, where they had to beat Virginia. Virginia was in their way back in '83. Somehow they survived Virginia, who was a better team. Duke is probably the better team. But what's going on now is that NC State is playing a whole lot better. What they're doing is feeding it down to the big fella, DJ Burns, who just happens to be someone like a point guard when it comes to passing in the low posts. They feed it down to him. If he's got one-on-one, if he can take the shot, he will. He might even kick it out then. But if you double team him, oh, he's going to find an open shot. And they've been hitting it. And North Carolina State is on the road. So unless you can find somebody who can body up against Burns and take him away or his deadly passing away, North Carolina State's going to be hard to beat. And they might just end up on the same kind of trajectory that they were in '83. But it would have been nice to see if they could have got a rematch with Houston. And if they would have beaten Houston and make it to the Final Four, then you can just see it setting up now. It's going to be Purdue or Connecticut going up against the NC State team, Cinderella again. Now, you know how Cinderella tend to fare in these big championship games. Either you're going to do what you always, what got you to the championship, or reality is going to strike. And most of the time, reality does not strike. Cinderella always end up wearing the crown. But as far as NC State goes, if you want to beat NC State, what you're going to have to do is just let Burns, let him score. If you just let him do what he do and not get his teammates as involved, then you cutting pretty much their power off. But if you just try to overcompensate on Burns and let him kick out to his teammates, then he becomes more effective. If you apply that to football terms, look at Lamar Jackson. I told you the way to beat the Baltimore Ravens is to stop the run between the tackles, meaning the backs. If you can't stop the backs, you can't stop Lamar Jackson. Because if they're running, now you got to worry about them and you forget about him or have to focus less on the quarterback. Now he's going to kill you. But if you take that running game away, the backs, now he's got to stand in there and try to beat you with his arm. Because now you know he's going to run the football. You can keep him bottled up and do that if you've already shut down the running game. Then it makes him far less effective. Now they picked up Derrick Henry. That was a great pickup by the Ravens. But I feel it's still going to come down to at some point that quarterback's going to have to stand in there and throw it. Now that you have a Derrick Henry, you know that he's going to get the ball X amount of times. So because he's getting the X amount of times, you can set your game plan up accordingly. But what you're going to see, Baltimore is going to go on another run because the people are developing a game plan that they're going to unleash on him in the playoffs. They're not going to show Baltimore what they're going to do to him once to get to the playoffs. But once you get to the playoffs and you start to tighten up on them, this is what Jackson does. He starts to tighten up. I've said to you all along, I want to see this guy throw the football. I am rooting for him to throw the football, but he has not shown me that he can throw the football when he has to throw it. When he's got to put one in there, I haven't seen him do it. You say what you want about Zay Flowers fumbling the ball, and he did throw a couple of good passes deep down there, find a wide open receiver, but that triple coverage interception, that's unacceptable. And you can't say, well, he hadn't advanced to that point. Well, just a week before, the announcer said, well, he's gotten it down to a science now. You look at 1, 2, 3 is not there, he takes off. Well, I didn't see that in the championship game. He had a wide open running lane on the 3rd and 1. He's so focused on trying to hit a pass downfield that he don't even take the easy scramble for a first down. So he got out of sorts. And this is what I'm saying. If you take that running game away from the Ravens, then they become a different team. And that's the same thing that's going to happen with North Carolina State if you can take away Burns down low. but that's yet to be seen. Now, if you see what I'm doing here, I'm bouncing around and tying everything together. That's just the way I talk. But if you listen and you put the pieces together, then you see exactly what I'm talking about. I always thought this was a negative trait, trying to put everything together in pieces. But it actually works well in the classroom because some kids are always not paying attention. You miss the first part of what I'm saying. Hear the second part, and then when I recap the first part in another way, then they get the whole thing then. And this is kind of what we're doing here. So again, if you just join, talking about the NCAA tournament over the years, because it all started with me back in 1980, and that crash on the left there with the car teetering over the edge, that is remnants of the Skyway Bridge in Tampa St. Pete area that got hit by a vessel that caused the bridge to collapse. Much in the same way that you had the bridge collapse in Baltimore the other day. Um, uh, the systems failed and it caused the bridge to hit those pillars. And once that happened, the bridge folded like a house of cards. And and just so happened, it occurred at a time of morning with very few people on the bridge. I do a little ride share, and just yesterday I picked up a guy who said he worked in Baltimore and he used to take that bridge all the time. And he's trying to figure out what he's going to do or what the people in Baltimore are going to do with that bridge being out. And he was talking about all of the couple of tunnels that they have and a few other bridges. But that is a very, very long go around for a lot of people. So if they have to go to catch a bridge into downtown Baltimore, only way they can get there are through the tunnels. And I have some experience. I've never been in inside Baltimore, but I used to when I was in the service. When my first base was up in New Jersey, McGuire, and I used to come up 95. And if I recall, I think it's three tunnels in the Baltimore area that you have to go through as you going down 95. Maybe two, but I remember two specifically, but I believe it's three tunnels on 95 in that area there. And I can see that's going to be severely backed up, kind of like what you're seeing in Mobile now. The traffic just going through those tunnels in Mobile is just ridiculous. And it's prompted that city to, I believe they've already broken ground on a new bridge that's going to go over. And that's going to make a big difference to break up that gridlock. But something like this is unforeseen. But if you notice that bridge that collapsed, that roadway deck that collapsed in Philadelphia, and you had the other one in Atlanta a couple of years ago. The transportation department, they get right on that. And so instead of taking 4 or 5 years to build, they should have that bridge up within 2 years because it's very, very important to the area. And you can bet that those bridges are going to be built better than what they are now. Same thing happened in Tampa. And what they did as an as an enhancement or improvement, they have like sensors and these different systems that will prevent the bridges from being hit. Because if the ship fails, they're going to hit these pillars with the barriers on them to stop the ship. So you know how big those ships are. They got to be mighty strong. But the way it's set up, I know the Matthews Bridge. I don't see that the middle part of that can be hit because they got those little islands there, and the really big ships, it can't really get under the Matthews. But the Danes Point Bridge out there, I've seen those cargo ships, and I've seen those cruise ships, and they go right in the middle there, and they stay in that general channel there. But I think what the probably have done, they've dug those channels that if the ship shifts over too much, then those channels won't be as deep and will slow the speed down of those ships as they try to go through those tunnels, those channels. And I think that will improve the chances of a cargo ship not tearing down a bridge like they did here in Baltimore. So you can expect something like that to happen once they replace this bridge in Baltimore. But going back to the tournament over the years, like I said, this is going to be my 45th. And I saw the Twin Towers, Melvin Turpin and Sam Bowie, 84. Georgetown was just too strong for him. But, Turpin, I understand, he committed suicide a couple of years ago. That was tragic. I mentioned Lorenzo Charles back in 83. He ended up dying. A lot of these guys that you see on these tournaments and athletic programs, they don't tend to live too long. I had a guy when I was in the service. master sergeant I worked under. Sergeant Green out of the Bradenton area. He tells me that athletes don't live too long. I had never paid it any attention at that point, but then I started watching, and sure enough, he was right. A lot of these athletes, they don't make it out of these 40s. We had a guy, hero, athletic hero from my town, Jarvis Williams. He ended up having an asthma attack and it killed him. He was what, about 44, 45. He wasn't that old. If he was that old. And it's been like, what, 15 years now since he's been gone. And, you wonder, I should do a study on why is it that athletes don't live very long. Now, I could see a football player, a guy like Jarvis always hitting somebody. What kind of pressure does that put on the body as you inflict punishment on another guy that's coming at you? Not that the other person is taking all the punishment may actually be inflicted upon the defender because he has to come up with the force enough to get a person his size or bigger on the ground. And you're taking a heavy blow as you deliver your own blow. So that's something to think about. So you wonder if your chest cavity gets damaged or what kind of internal damage are you doing when you come up and tackle somebody. So that'd be something worthwhile to look into. But Lorenzo Charles, Melvin Turpin, he committed suicide, I understand. That was the 84. 85, Villanova played the perfect game, beat Georgetown. So when Georgetown won in 84, trying to repeat in 85, again, Cinderella raises his head, knock you right off. In 86, Never Nervous Purvis came out of nowhere, kind of a little bit different way than Dr. Duncanstein. Took Louisville to the championship in 80. He knocked off Duke. That was back in Dallas. Duke played Houston in Dallas last night. So, they use the same cities all the time, but this was Reunion Arena, I believe. That was 1986. Milt Wagner was his sidekick. And I'm talking off the top. I'm not looking at any notes or anything like that. It's just, I lived this and I got a long memory for what I know. In 87, um, before I say what happened then, I watched the Pivot podcast yesterday, and they didn't interview anybody. It was just having a conversation amongst themselves, and they were talking about the popularity of the women's game and the star players that they have are outweighing what's taking place in the men's game. They said that they can identify players by what they look like, but they don't really know their names. And I can agree with what they're saying. And they actually said that they'd rather watch the women's tournament because for whatever reason it's more exciting to them. Well, I can almost understand what they're saying. The women's game is exciting at this point because you have all the players that's chirping and doing different things, and you got Caitlin Clark breaking records. Um, I can stamp off on most of that, but what I can't stamp off on, he's saying he would rather watch the women than the men. The only reason I would watch the women over the man's game, is because of the fundamentals. They've always played better fundamentals in the ladies' game, primarily because they couldn't dunk. But the game now has evolved into a three-point shooting game. The women can shoot those 3 pointers, just like the men can. Another thing, the women, they don't go to the pros like they do with the men. They changed the rule in the NBA several years back, maybe 15, 20 years, where you had to do at least 1 year in college before you can go to the pros. You can't go straight from high school like LeBron did, straight into the pros. You got to do at least 1 year now. If a guy comes in like John Walls or Kyrie Irving or somebody, they do 1 year and they go to the pros. They're not developing over a 4 year span. So the women are still on their old model because there's no upside to going to pros. Now that you have NIL, there's no need for anybody really to go pro. You can stay in college, get that experience, and make millions of dollars. That's what's taking place now. So the popularity of the women's game is because of that 3 point shot and the NIL and everything else. You know these women's names more so than you used to. Why am I saying this? I've been watching the women's tournament just as long as I've been watching the men's tournament. You take Kim Mulkey for she won championships at Baylor and she won it last year with LSU. I remember Kim Mulkey as a point guard for La Tech when they played the NCAA championship games at the Scope in Richmond, Virginia. I seen all of that. I saw the La Techs. I saw Jody Conrad in Texas go undefeated and win the championship. I saw Cheryl Miller burst on the scene and go undefeated for Southern Cal and win the championship. Then you start coming up with the Tennessee, they dominated. Then after Tennessee dominate, you got Connecticut. Then Baylor. Stanford's always been in the mix with Tara Vanderveer. Great coach. Now you got South Carolina. The difference between the men and the women's game, because the talent is not as vast as the men's side, you have these dominant teams that dominate for longer. Now, if you relate that back to UCLA in the 60s and 70s with John Wooden, it's the same kind of thing. Everybody else hadn't caught up to them. But once they did catch up to them, now you start to see those championships spread out. It's happening a little bit more with the women. You don't have that dominant run from Connecticut anymore, which looked like it was going to last forever. Looked like Tennessee was going to last forever. Now South Carolina is dominating, and it looks like that's going to last forever, but it's not. Those championships are going to spread around. But as far as excitement and fundamentals, yes, the women, they have that. But if it comes down to watching Caitlin Clark go against the South Carolina, or me watching North Carolina getting on with Kentucky for the championship, oh, that ladies' game got to go to Tuesday night or Sunday night like they've been doing. Because as much as you say that it's overtaking the men's game, I don't see that. And I'm not saying that from a chauvinist position. I'm saying to you from somebody that's been watching this for 45 years. Women's games are real popular right now because most people are just discovering it. Well, like I say, I've been watching this for 45 years too. So my opinion is just as valid as anybody else who just discovered the game. Yes, there are star players out there. There's always been star players in the women's game. Like I say, Cheryl Miller, Teresa Edwards, the Catchings, the Tamika ladies from Tennessee. You can go all the way back and find some star players. Cheryl Swoops at Texas Tech took her team to the championship out of nowhere. So it's always been great players. Now, speaking of great players, another thing they talked about on the pivot, they talked about Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark just broke all the scoring records, men and women, Pistol Pete Mavericks, and she's getting all the accolades she deserves. But going back to the NIL thing, she's making millions right now in college, but she can't expect to make millions when she goes to the WNBA. So when you start talking about the popularity of the men's game and the women's game, it doesn't seem to have changed at all because the women don't make the same money, even though the season is a lot shorter than the men's games because it's pretty much a summer thing. They don't make the same money because the popularity is never going to outdo the NBA. It's a byproduct of the NBA. And you take somebody like Clark, who's very popular, and who should be making more money based on her popularity when she goes to the WNBA. So they brought up the fact that Ice Cube offered her $5 million to come play in his league. It was the 3-on-1, Big Three, I think it is. He offered her $5 million to come play in that league. Now that would be great for Clark to take that money, but then it also puts her in a position to get exposed. Yeah, she can go out there and shoot that 3 and 4 pointer, but now you got to play defense. And that's one of the points that they brought up on the pivot yesterday. Who's going to sit there and watch Caitlin Clark get back down deep in the post and dunk them? But that's what they're going to do. They're going to find a weak link on defense and they're going to exploit it. Yeah, she can go out there and shoot. So after a couple days or a week, maybe 2 games, the excitement is going to wear out because they're going to see what they're going to be able to do to them. So while she may be a positive shooting the ball, she becomes a handicap when it comes to defense, which means if you're not going to win a championship, it's not going to work. So it's a great idea and also great marketing for Cube to come up with that because now when you talk about the possibilities of Clark's pro pro ventures, the big three comes up because he has put his name next to hers. Great marketing strategy. Guy's smart, man. And I think he's gonna, if the NBA don't block him all the way out, he's gonna expand that league. Which puts me in the mind of another podcast I look at, Boyce Watkins. He's always talking about how all the rich black players and entertainers can pool their money together and start their own league. Yeah, they can do that. But here's the thing: those other leagues have put together safeguards to limit the little guy. One of the big competitors in NFL was the USFL. They found a way to break that up, took them to court and everything else. So while you sitting here fighting all these cases, the money that you could have put to use growing your own individual league, you got to go fight court cases. You spending money just for the right to survive. NFL knows you have a right to survive, but they're going to challenge you in court, make you spend money. At this point, NFL has bottomless pockets. They take you to court forever, and you're going to run out of money before they do. That's just like somebody trying to take on the feds in court. Feds have endless resources. Eventually, you're going to run out. So you're going to spend all your money just to reach the same conclusion. Whatever they want is what they're going to get. So that is the biggest impediment to the idea of blacks pulling the money together to start their own sports teams. It's going to be a tough way to go, and I'm not quite sure how they're going to be able to pull that off. But the fact that Cube is laying the groundwork for it, some kind of way he's gonna expand this league, and I think it's going to be a big thing in the future. But the big thing is he started it, and he's trying to grow it, and he's sticking with it, and he's going to stick with it until he gets it to grow. So that is a great thing that Cube is doing. Also, with Clark, she's going to make far less money in the WNBA, and the fact that she's a hot child now, it brings up another counterpoint to what the guys on the pivot were talking about, as far as her getting offered this $5 million offer. Well, she's not the greatest. Well, I'll take that back. I won't even say that. I don't know who the greatest player, and then I won't even open an argument up of who could be the greatest player. But there have been other great players who deserve the same opportunity. So they're going to think, well, why do you offer me this when I was coming out? Like Aja Wilson, she could say that. She's arguably one of the best right now, if not the best. Great player in college. Why didn't she get the same offers from Q or anybody else? It's something to think about. So when you think of Caitlin Clark going to the big three, it's a great idea, great marketing strategy. But after 2 or 3 games, uh, I don't think she'd be looking too well after that. She'll make her $5 million. She still can go to the WNBA, and she'll still be one of the greatest women players ever because she can shoot that ball, and she's gonna talk the trash, let you know about it. But speaking of Iowa, they are in the final, the elite, the Sweet 16. I believe they play tonight. Um, they got to play. I want to say Kansas, Kansas State. I forget who they're playing, but if they can get by them, then LSU might be sitting there waiting on them in a regional final. If they lost to LSU last year, LSU just had a little bit more soul weapon, more weapons than Iowa had last year. Kind of like warmed down a little bit, and I think you're going to see the same kind of thing if that was to take place. But as much as LSU is and all the notoriety they get, they still can't beat South Carolina. South Carolina is the best team in women's basketball, and I don't see anybody beating them. Now, last year, Clark pulled that maneuver on Raven Johnson, backed off and let her shoot, and Raven never had facing something like that before, kind of froze. She didn't know what to do. I give her great credit because she did come out and spoke on that situation, and I think if something like that happens again, I think she'll be at least try to take advantage of that, have a plan to take advantage of something like that if it happens again. But as you look at the stats, as one of my subscribers told me that the stats she has for shooting that ball, she's not shooting the ball very well this year. So if Johnson is out there, she still may be the weak link. Weak link. Let Johnson shoot, get the rebound, and bring it back up the floor. That just may be the way to beat South Carolina. For LSU, they they don't have that same mindset to come up with a plan to try to beat South Carolina. But they beat them like 9, 10 times in a row. Uh, they got so frustrated that tempers flared and almost turned into an on-court brawl last time they played. So no matter what they try, it hadn't seemed to work. The only thing I can do, they go out to hit some outside shots, then pound it down to Reese, let her get on and score, and then find a weak link like Johnson on the outside, get the rebound, slow it down a little bit, make it a slugfest. That's the only way I see South Carolina getting beat. Kind of in the way of Connecticut. Connecticut wants to slugfest the men's side. Everybody in their mama has picked UConn to win the championship. This before the tournament even started. If you recall, my pick was Purdue. Why do I pick Purdue? Especially since they lost to the number one as the number one seed last year in the first round. It's the same reason we talked about in the beginning. The upsets that have taken place over the years. North Carolina State in '83, Villanova in '85. It was UConn that beat Duke. I want to say Mateen Cleaves, not Mateen Cleaves, but what's that little point guard? I forget his name. Cleaves played for Michigan State. But right around the same time, um, UConn knocked off Duke when they burst on the scene. And that was considered an upset. Upsets galore throughout the history of the tournament. And when Purdue lost last year to Fairleigh Dickinson, just like when Virginia lost as the number one seed to Baltimore County, they galvanized. They had nothing to lose. All the pressure's off. Yeah, we can't win as the number one seed. Or we getting all stressed out and worried about what could happen. We might as well go and play. And my pick was Purdue. Purdue's got a 7'4" center. You're not going in there any kind of way. Only thing you can hope to do is get the big fella in foul trouble, get him out of there. I think UConn, they want to play at a certain pace, which favors Purdue. And you got all the pressure on you because the closer you get to the championship, last year you didn't have that pressure. But now everybody expects you to do it. Going back in the tournament again. The biggest upset in the tournament that I ever seen was back in '91 when Duke beat UNLV. Duke played Vegas in 1990 championship in Denver. Beat the brakes off Duke by 30 points. Embarrassed them on national TV. Duke come out later and say, well, Hurley was sick and this and that. No, 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 no. Hurley could not defend Anderson Hunt. Hunt just scored again, matter of fact. Vegas only lost that year. They lost the starting center, David Butler, who they successfully replaced the next year with George Ackles. They had the other guys. Larry Johnson down low, Stacey Augmon, the swing man. Then you had the guards Anderson Hunt and Greg Anthony? Played for the Knicks, first round pick. He had pretty much the whole team back. All they had to do was get Ackles up to speed. And he did that. Went through the whole season undefeated. But as the season wore on, you could see the expectations with their undefeated record wearing on them. And then, just like this year, they talk about how the NCAA stacked the bracket against Iowa. It don't matter if you come to play. They stacked the bracket in 1991 against Vegas. They put Georgetown in there. And at the time, Georgetown was Georgetown. And he had them two twin towers, Alonzo Mourning and Mutombo. Got by them in the second round. It was a slugfest. Georgetown was right there with them. But in the end, Vegas just pulled off enough to get by them. That was a stacked bracket. Then they got by them. then Utah was sitting right there. But Jarris had a good program in Utah. They just couldn't beat Vegas, and Vegas pulled away from them in the end. And then you had Arizona, who was supposed to be the team to beat Vegas, but they got beat by Seton Hall. Seton Hall just beat Vegas 2 years ago. They didn't see Vegas. Terry the Hurricane to play. So what happened? Vegas ended up winning that game, pulled away in the end. Uh, uh, but that was a brutal bracket. They could have went out in the second round against Georgetown, and nobody would have said that was no upset. That was very possible. You know what Mourning and Mutombo did in the pros? So they talk about the women and how the bracket is stacked. I don't want to hear that. You got to play because even as a number one seed, you're not guaranteed to beat number 16. Ask Virginia, ask Purdue. But back to the point, because upsets happen, I think Purdue was galvanized and they playing their ball. They're confident. They just picked apart a good Gonzaga team, whipped them for the second time this year, by the way. In Gonzaga, you saw what they did to Kansas. Kansas might be hurting a little bit, but they were still in the tournament. They were still right there. Gonzaga picked them apart, but Purdue picked them apart. So I'm still riding with Purdue to knock off Connecticut. And the way things are looking, it might be North Carolina State in the final. That's why you got to play. One and done. NFL, one and done. Baseball, you can lose 3 games and still win the series. The NBA, you can lose 3 games to win the series. I mean, they try like the Dickens to try to make this stuff seem so relevant and important. Oh, this is game 6. It's 3-2 lead, and man, if it's not life or death, 1-1, personally, I could care less. This is why the NCAA tournament is so important. It's the illustration of life, just like the NFL. An illustration of life. You get one shot. You want that girl, you might not see her again. You better say something to her now. You want that high dollar position, you better talk for it now. The kids I see now, they don't want to talk. They want to play on their phones and think everything's just going to just fall into their lap. That's not the case. As always in life, the teams and the players and the individuals who go after what they want, those are the ones that are successful in life. Going to be that way 100 years from now, just like it was that way 300 years ago. You got to go for it now. And I think Purdue is going for it. And wow, they may not win the championship because of fate. That's just the way it goes. Look at Houston. All over their history since they've been in the tournament, every time they lose, some kind of heartbreaking fashion. They lost their star player last night. He couldn't go for the second half. And it still came down to a 3-point shot attempt by Houston. What would have happened if this guy would have played the whole game? So Purdue is my pick still to win the championship. But again, that Vegas team, that pressure that they put on them, it came down to the semifinal round. And just so happened in the 90 game, I always liked UNLV because of that letter combination. Same reason I first started liking LSU. First time I heard UNLV, I fell in love. Go back to 85 when I first saw him play. And they come up with Freddie Banks. At the same time, they came up with the 3-point shot back in 86. He's a record breaker. I don't know if he's still in the books, but he was the head 3-point man for a long time in the record books. 86, they got knocked off. I want to say it was Pepperdine that knocked them off. In 87, they finally got through to the Final Four. They did get to the Final Four one time before, back in 77 with Reggie Theus, but he ended up losing to North Carolina that year. Um, and then after in 87, when they got there, going back to the pivot, they talked about how the coaches were the big names in women's basketball. Well, it was the same thing in men's basketball. You didn't talk about the star players. You talked about the star coaches. And Bobby Knight was the star coach for Indiana. He had won the championship in 76, I believe it was, with Quinn Buckner. They went undefeated. They came back again in 81 with Isaiah Thomas. And Isaiah Thomas and Bobby Knight, oil and water. Just by the way that what we know about Isaiah Thomas over the years, you know that was a bad little mixture there. And I don't think it was a good thing for the program, which is why I think that Thomas didn't stay very long. But in '87, Indiana marched through the tournament and had a good team, but they, to me, because of the starness of the coach, they got away with murder. I remember they played LSU, I believe it was. They played LSU, and that was a game that Knight got a technical. He takes the chair and slings it on the floor. Now, how is it that a coach can get away with something like that? He takes the chair and throws it on the floor. In the tournament, he's supposed to be kicked out of the game and probably kicked out of the rest of the tournament. But this is the kind of stuff that Knight used to do, get away with murder. But they let him stay because of the starness of the coach. So when they start talking on the pivot about the star players, star coaches, I understood exactly what they're saying because I saw that. They talked about Gino Auriemma, Pat Summitt. Yes, these are coaches with names bigger than life. And I saw that in '87. But it came down to fundamentals. I remember in the regional championship game, they didn't block out. Indiana got the rebound and stuck it back for the winning points. They get to the Final Four where they play Vegas. Vegas ended up shooting threes all over the place, but in the end, Indiana got the bounce more so than what they did, and they ended up knocking Vegas off. Syracuse also got to the Final Four that year and ended up losing a good game against Indiana, and that's the last time the Hoosiers have won the championship. So they won 3 in a 10-year span, and after that, they hadn't done anything. You know how that career ended with Bobby Knight in Indiana. It just the marriage just died. He spent a couple of years at Texas Tech, and after that, it was last year that he died. So that was '87. '88, um, that was Danny Manning and the Miracles. They ended up beating Duke. That was also in Dallas. Kansas bust on the scene and won it that year. '89, Michigan won the championship. I already talked about '90. '91, Duke won it. Big reason they were able to beat Vegas that day. Um, they got Vegas in a hole early off. They jumped out by like 10 points in the first couple of minutes, and that was a big shot in the arm. Vegas, still a better team, chipped away at it. I don't think they really took the lead, but it came down to 77-77, if I'm not mistaken. And I was in the house that night. I had ordered the tickets. At the time, they would put ordering information on the screen, and it was a lottery whether or not you got that ticket. Well, I put my name in, and I got 2 tickets. So I ended up going to Indianapolis, and that's where the '91 Final Four took place. That year, it was Duke. Kansas played North Carolina in the first game, where you had star coach Dean Smith. He got kicked out in the end, losing to his star pupil coach, Roy Williams. That game took like 2.5 hours. I didn't think it was ever going to end. Then Duke, from the opening tip, jumped off to a fast start against Vegas. They chipped them down. But like I said, it came down to 77-77. Leitner hit 2 free throws. He probably shouldn't have hit. Well, he made the free throws, so I can't say what he shouldn't have done. So they're up by 2 points. It came down with about 10 seconds left, swinging out to Larry Johnson. He's on the 3-point line. But he didn't shoot the 3. He kind of like froze a little bit. And ended up, they didn't score. But from the Knicks time that Larry Johnson can hit that 3-point shot. Now, I don't know if that was the catalyst that he wanted to go learn, work on his 3-point shooting game, or he just froze in that moment. I don't know. That's something you have to ask him. I don't think he'd give you a good answer on it, but that's what it looked like to me. It looked like he just froze, but we know he can hit that 3-point shot. But it should have never come down to that. Again, circumstances make all the difference in basketball. Basketball is one sport where your star player can get kicked out and not do anything vicious. You can foul out of a game. You can't foul out of a football game. You can't foul out of a baseball game. When you get 5 fouls, you're gone. And Greg Anthony picked up some very touchy fouls there during the game. But the last one, I was hot when they called it. They called him for a charge with about 4 minutes left. That made all the difference in the world because Vegas didn't have their quarterback to settle things down to get through the final stretch. It was Anthony the reason why they went on that was able to get through that brutal West bracket. But with him out, now you got to put Hunt at the point guard, and it changes things, and it affected Vegas. But I thought it was a bad call. But once the emotions died down, and I saw it on film later, I don't know what Anthony was doing. Kind of like, man, you paid off. What are you doing? And then later on, after a couple months after that tournament ended, he got Anderson Hunt in the magazine being accused of point shaving allegations. So maybe Vegas threw that game. Who knows? They already had the championship from the year before. So what's another one? You didn't get paid. It's not like they have now with the NIL. Can you imagine what some of these players would have made back then if they had NIL? You can't even imagine what Johnson and Hunt and all them boys would have been making had they had NIL back in those days. But that's here and there. But I'm not going to go through the entire 45 years. But I think the best game that I've seen, best championship game, there's been a whole bunch of them. I saw that Villanova a couple years back hit that game-winning shot against North Carolina at the buzzer. That was great. Um, then you see theatrics in the game. I think the best cat and mouse situation I saw was 2008 when you had Memphis playing Kansas. Bill Self, the coach of Kansas, he's going up against Memphis and Calipari, who had Derrick Rose. Well, I think it was the beginning of the second half. I think it was the second half. Bill Self tells his guards to back down. So instead of being up in position to cover the guards like they normally would, he had them back down toward the free throw line. He's basically saying, Derrick Rose, you cannot beat me from the outside. My first thought was this, and quote unquote, they just called Derrick Rose. I say Bill Self just called Derrick Rose a hoe, meaning he don't think you can beat us from the outside. Derrick Rose immediately recognized that, raised up and shot a three right in Bill Self's eye. When they come back down the court the next time, Kansas was back in position. I call that a cat and mouse game because it was a strategic move by Self. Rose recognized it and reacted. And the only thing that was missing in that sequence, Rose didn't look Self over in the eye and say, "What else you got?" That's the only thing that was missing from that sequence was Rose looking at Self, letting him know, "I know what you're trying to do." And I referenced this same situation to the Caitlin Smith Raven Johnson thing that happened last year when Caitlin Clark did pretty much the same thing to Raven Johnson. She didn't know how to react. She froze. She didn't do the right thing. But Rose, he really ran up to the occasion and sunk one right in Bill Self's eye. So cat and mouse move, that's probably was the best. And like I say, the best game probably was the ending of Villanova and North Carolina. That was a great game. So I'm looking forward to more great action in this Final Four here. We're going to punch tickets for the first two teams today. But I think in the end, Purdue is going to cut down the nets. Now, if they don't make it, they don't make it. But that's just what I think. Because of fate, just like Virginia lost to that first seed, they came back and won the championship the next year. I think Purdue's going to do the same thing. And if you look over the 45-year history of my watching this tournament, fate has replayed themselves in similar situations all the time. Like I say, look at North Carolina State. They're on the same kind of run they did in '83. Houston, they can't get out of that heartbreak road. It's always the same teams. No matter what level of sport, it's always the same teams. If you won a championship sometime in your past, you're going to win again. Any level. If you won a championship before, you're going to win it again. Might take you 40 years. Might take you 80 like the Red Sox. But you're going to win again. Duke's going to win again. North Carolina's going to win again. UCLA will win again. People didn't think UCLA would win again from the drought from 75 was the last time they won it. And then Ed O'Bannon comes along in 95. They knock them off. If you won it before, you're going to win it again in any level of sport because you always see the same teams over and over again. Now, with these players in high school bouncing around, it doesn't seem likely that whoever gets the best players, recruit the best players under the table, however they get them. That seems like that's going to continue, but eventually they're going to change the rules where that won't happen anymore. And the teams that won it before, somehow, if they had to recruit themselves, it don't matter. They're going to find a way to win. It's always the same cast of characters, no matter what sport you choose. So this NCAA tournament, when we punch these two tickets today, UConn is right there. Everybody expects them to win it. But I think the toughest games lie ahead. They want to be a champion, they're going to have to prove it. But back to these two bridges, St. Pete and Baltimore, those are tragic events. And with all those big ship containers, you can see them. A lot of times you be riding under the bridge and you can see the ship's coming. And I think myself, man, let me hurry up and get off this bridge just in case something like that happens. I've always thought like that, from a what if possibility. I remember old college buddy, old Kip, he used to call me crazy because I'd be sitting at the football game looking around for an escape hatch just in case something went down. He laughed at me, thought I was funny. But all the tragic events since we got out of college backs up my position. So I don't know what they're going to do with these bridges. And it's going to happen again somewhere. A lot of these bridges are old, especially around in Jacksonville. Those are some very old bridges. They're always doing some kind of maintenance on them. This can happen at any time. So when it's your time, it is your time. It's like these basketball teams. So we pray for the people that are involved. Hopefully, um, we have minimal damage. Um, in that St. Pete situation, they thought the pilot of the ship was drunk, but no, he wasn't drunk. The storm blew him off course. But that still doesn't mean that it didn't affect him. I read reports on that, and he blamed themselves, and it ate him up. So finally, it just killed him. The stress and the pressure of it all killed him. Probably the same thing is going to happen with this Baltimore crew. I know that guy that drove the tugboat that knocked the train off track in Mobile, the one that sunk into the bay that time, it ate him up. Uh, the tugboat pilot, so this kind of thing weighs heavily on not just the people who died and the families, but the people who were involved in the wreck. They tend to blame themselves for such things. So again, hopefully everything works out. But I just wanted to tie together the history of the NCAA tournament between these two events, and which me marks my 45th Final Four. And I like to hope it ends in a exciting fashion like most of the other ones. And we will keep the survivors and the families involved of these tragic accidents in our minds as we watch this um, Final Four take place next week. So until then, this has been Sports for Real, and I'll come back at you with more action and try to keep you posted on a much more timely fashion. I'm out.